Am I the asshole for criticizing the name my cousin picked out for her baby and ruining her excitement? My cousin Stephanie and I are really more friends than relatives. An important note is that she's not really online much, so can be out of the loop on certain memes and jokes in internet culture, and TBH, doesn't really understand the concept of viral internet references or how they work. Stephanie is pregnant and just found out it's going to be a girl. About a week ago she told a gathering of her best girlfriends that she's going to name her daughter Karen. The room instantly went cold, but after an awkward silence, everyone else politely said it was lovely. I couldn't bring myself to respond at all. Later in the evening, when Stephanie was out of the room, everyone was immediately like, OMG, that poor kid, and why would she pick Karen of all names? I was uncomfortable with this conversation, given that everyone had been so positive about the name to her face. I thought more about it over the next couple of days, and just felt really weird about the whole thing. The name is really loaded, to the point it could be detrimental to the baby, and Stephanie had no idea of the connotations to make an informed decision. So a couple of days later, I tentatively brought it up. I told her I was so excited for the baby, and just wanted her to have all available information when picking a name. I then started to explain that Karen has some negative connotations and has become sort of an internet joke to describe a specific kind of entitled middle-aged woman. Stephanie instantly was furious and started talking over me, saying, "Why are you saying this? This is so mean." I was really surprised by her reaction. It felt very, very out of character, so I immediately stopped and said, "I'm really sorry. I didn't mean to hurt your feelings, I just wanted to tell you something I thought you might not know." She replied, "That's the name I picked for my daughter. And you think I picked it as some kind of joke? I don't understand why you'd say something so hurtful." When she said that, I felt like it signaled that she didn't really understand what I was trying to tell her, so after agonizing for a second about whether to press the issue even though she was so angry, I felt like in for a penny. In for a pound. And since she was already mad, I wanted her to at least understand what I was trying to explain to her. I googled Karen Know Your Meme on my phone and tried to show her the screen of results while saying, "Look, I'm just saying that there's more meaning to the name than you may realize." She stood up, pushed my phone away and shouted, "Wow!" She then stormed out of my home and drove away. My aunt and mom have been berating me all week, because Stephanie told them that I made fun of her baby name. Stephanie has not spoken to me or responded to my text since. I can take a hint and I'm not going to broach a topic again that caused so much distress, but I keep going back and forth on whether I was TA here by bringing it up in the first place. Note, in the original post, OOP was overwhelmingly given a YTA judgment in response to this post. Edit. Thanks everyone. I have been properly schooled, and I accept my judgment that I was TA here. Stephanie and I have a history of being extremely open and honest with each other. I was the maid of honor in her wedding, which we planned on being the case from a young age, and we always joked as teenagers that part of my duties would include talking her out of the marriage if the groom she picked sucked. And so maybe I was too flippant with approaching this topic due to our history, and was unempathetic in underestimating how much she was already invested in the name she chose for her future daughter. I admit I'm a bit frustrated that Stephanie still doesn't understand what I was trying to tell her. She still thinks I was making some kind of weird, cruel joke accusing her of picking the name as a joke. But I have messaged her a sincere apology that she accepted, and I will never speak of this again, to Stephanie or baby Karen. I'll also stand up for Stephanie if her other friends shit talk the name around me again. If they're not willing to voice their thoughts to Stephanie directly, they need to not say the kinds of things they were saying behind her back. Edit 2. One more thing. I definitely was not trying to tell Stephanie to not name her daughter Karen. I just wanted her to make the decision either way knowing the connotations, since I'd want someone to do the same for me if I picked a baby name with cultural baggage I wasn't aware of. I realize now I handled it poorly and was hurtful to Stephanie in the process, but I just wanted to be clear that I wasn't actively trying to talk her out of the name. I just didn't want her to be blindsided if it came up later. Additional context from OP's comments. Stephanie and her husband have a deal on baby names where she picks girl baby names, he picks boy baby names, and they each have unlimited veto power for the other person's choices. He's on board with Karen Efek. We're all the same age, late 20s, but neither of them spends time online or is even particularly tech-savvy. Update 1. My post last summer wasn't the most exciting or dramatic on AITA, but I wanted to provide an update if anyone is interested. Baby Karen was born healthy and happy back in October. She's an absolute sweetheart of a baby, and I'm totally in love with her. Between March and May I didn't get to see her at all in person, but I was doing regular FaceTime, house party calls with Stephanie and Karen, and over the last few weeks, I've been going over to Stephanie's house to sit in her backyard and chat with Stephanie at Karen from a lengthy distance. I have two reasons for updating. First, I've realized since Karen's birth that her name has taken on new meaning to me. When I'm with her, Karen just means her, and I don't think about the other connotations. In other words, you guys were right. That said though, my second reason for updating is that Stephanie got back into her years unused Facebook at the beginning of the pandemic to keep in touch with people. She's been on it pretty regularly lately for the first time in years. Historically, she's not really been into social media. Most people in our area, social circle have been posting really heavily about BLM and the protests happening right now, as well as racial justice issues more generally. As a result, Stephanie has now come into contact with a deluge of Karen memes for the first time, and found them confusing and horrifying, especially the use of Karen as shorthand for a racist. I've basically just declined to talk about it with Stephanie, because it went so poorly last time, but both my mother and her mother have hounded me about it because it's upsetting to Stephanie, and said things like, "Is this what you were talking about before? Why didn't you say so? Why didn't you explain it better? You should have told Stephanie." And Jesus wept. You really can't win. Thanks again for all your feedback on my last post. It was very helpful in giving me some zen about the situation. Edit. Wow, I've been super overwhelmed by the flood of very kind, heartfelt PMs, and just one or two not so kind ones, as well as the comments on my other post. Thank you everyone. It continually amazes me how many nice and empathetic people frequent a sub devoted to assholes. Additional comments from OP for context. In response to someone criticizing Stephanie, to be fair, Stephanie has been cool about it. First, she saw a bunch of posts about the Central Park Karen, when that white lady was harassing the black birdwatcher in the park, and came to me asking me to explain why everyone was calling the woman Karen when her name was Amy. Since she's gotten back on Facebook, she often asks me to be like her internet culture interpreter. I immediately told her, "Sorry, I'm not having a conversation with you about this, because we had a major conflict over it last year, and I'm not getting into it with you." I think that was the first time she started to understand what I'd been telling her last year. And in fairness to her, she didn't bring it up with me again after that. As for my mom and aunt, they're kind of generally ridiculous. They tend to be extremely reactive to whatever is going on precisely at the moment, and if someone in the family is upset, they get over-involved trying to fix it. Stephanie has been venting to her mom about this, not about me, just how upsetting the memes are. And she and my mom have just been doing their normal thing of blowing it out of proportion, and now making it my fault somehow. I love my mom and aunt dearly, but they're not to be reasoned with. In response to another criticism of Stephanie, honestly, with my mom and aunt, it's easier to just wait for them to move on to the next shiny thing. I don't blame Stephanie at all. She's just upset and confused, but hasn't made it my problem at all. My aunt and mom just have a flair for the dramatic. In response to someone saying they still thought OP was TA because they only brought up concerns with the name for selfish reasons. I probably wasn't clear about this in my original post, and I think it's probably because that's the part I cut down when I went way over the word limit on that first post, but when I described feeling weird and uncomfortable over the couple of days I took to ruminate after Stephanie's announcement, the weirdness and discomfort was mostly a response to what happened with our friend group rather than just my own feelings about the name. I felt super uncomfortable being in the room while our friends shit-talked Stephanie's name choice after praising it to her face. I didn't have the presence of mind to call them out before the moment passed, and I sat with that guilt for a couple of days. I didn't want to tell Stephanie what they said, because it would be tattly of me, and I also didn't want to cause conflict within the friend group or upset Stephanie. So raising the topic on my own seemed like a good compromise at the time. I did wrestle internally with how to handle it, and clearly I missed the mark. In response to the comment, do you understand that there is a massive difference in being upset with your friends for their response, and approaching Stephanie because you say you want her to be fully informed of her name choice? These are two different things that you're conflating. No, to be clear, I didn't raise the conversation with Stephanie in lieu of scolding our friends. I brought it up because I thought they owed it to her to raise those points to her face if they were going to say them at all. Ultimately, I thought Stephanie was owed the knowledge of those connotations, whatever she chose to do with that knowledge. Also, I don't know how to explain the context of our relationship, but Stephanie and I have a lifetime of shared radical honesty with one another, from the inconsequential, telling each other when outfits are unflattering, to the difficult, when she gave me a come to Jesus talk years ago about how someone I considered a close friend was super shitty to me and that I should end the friendship. Based on our extreme closeness and shared history, this conversation felt like the right move at the time, even though it ultimately backfired. Update 2. Hi all, I've gotten a few PMs over the last couple years asking for updates, and since we just celebrated Karen's 3rd birthday, I wanted to circle back to anyone following this story. First of all, baby Karen, not so much a baby anymore, is doing amazingly on her developmental milestones. She's a very bright child, sharp as the sharpest tack, and extremely tuned into her environment. Some of what she says is already fully in complete sentences, which just makes me want to cry when I hear it, because it seems like Stephanie was giving birth just yesterday. Karen loves books already, and will intently study the pictures in them for huge stretches of time and claim to be reading. And you would not believe the uncomfortably incisive questions she's already asking. I am fully convinced this child is going to grow up to be an actual genius. Regarding the name, unfortunately, when Karen started daycare earlier this year, she started getting grief for her name pretty quickly from the older kids. The daycare she attends mixes the ages together at a couple of different points throughout the day, and while there fortunately wasn't much direct bullying, 2 of the age 5s must have heard and internalized the derogatory connotations of the name Karen at home. As a result, they found her name absolutely hysterical, and they kind of spread the idea to the other kids that there was something funny wrong about her name. Karen was too little to understand what was happening, but found the other kids' behavior toward her generally upsetting. The daycare staff made every effort to shut it down, and let Stephanie and her husband know right away. After about a month of this, where the daycare wasn't having much success putting the kibosh on this behavior, and the kids weren't dropping it, Stephanie and her husband made the decision that Karen would be going by Carrie from now on, which was already an established nickname that a lot of family and friends were already using, and that Karen already recognized as referring to herself. Stephanie and I never really fully revisited what happened during her pregnancy, but when she was telling me about what was happening in daycare, she apologized to me. I immediately felt terrible and reassured her there was no reason to apologize. Emotions are complicated when you're pregnant, and that I thought having Karen go by Carrie was a great solution. Though changing what you're used to calling someone is fucking hard, I've found. And I'm still directly addressing her on manual mode, every single time. A lot of the responses I got to my last post were gleeful and leaned into the schadenfreude of the situation. And I have to say those responses really bummed me out. I would much rather live in a world where I was wrong about the impact Karen's name would have on her. I cannot emphasize enough what a sweet-dispositioned, smart, curious, loving little girl Carrie is, and how much she deserves every good thing in life. Also, a lot of people didn't like Stephanie in my last post, but I need you to understand that this is a tiny snapshot of a very emotionally high-strung time in her life, and overall, Stephanie is a wonderful lifelong friend. She has gotten me through so many personal crises over the years, and she will never fail to show up for the people she cares about. Being pregnant and having a strong emotional attachment to the name you've picked out for your daughter is completely understandable, and her pregnancy was pretty rough on her moods. She once wept uncontrollably at a cat food commercial when she was about 7 months pregnant. I also think my approach for trying to explain the name issue those years ago was very clumsy, and I could have done a better job of bringing it up. That said, with the distance of time, I am really glad I broached the topic. I feel like I owed Stephanie that information, and I can feel good about giving it to her. If I'd chosen not to bring it up at the time, I think I'd have a lot of regrets now. The only thing I'd change now, looking back, is that I would try to bring it up more gently somehow with Stephanie so I could have had the chance to explain. In summary, all is well. We've run into a little bump in the road with other kids' reactions to Carrie's name, but in some ways, it's better to get this out of the way now, when Carrie doesn't really understand what's happening, than have this happen in kindergarten or elementary school down the road, when full-on bullying could be a risk. She's adjusting really well to going by her nickname full-time, and Stephanie and her husband are planning on enrolling her with Carrie as her preferred name in all future schooling. And since schools around here go by preferred name rather than legal name in things like classroom roll calls, it's possible she can get through K-12 without it ever really being widely known among her peers that her legal name is Karen. And I really hope this common usage of the name Karen dies down in the next few years. Edit. Really disappointed to be getting hate messages directed at Carrie, wishing that terrible things befall her and calling her the C word. Please remember she's an innocent child. Edit 2. Point of clarification. The boys at daycare apparently didn't know that Karen was a name. The way they'd heard it used at home made them think it was just a term used to insult people, and that it might be a bad word. That's why they found it so funny, because in their worldview, it was like meeting someone named Fartface, or Asshole. The daycare staff explained to them that Karen is a real name, and that lots of people are named Karen, and of course they tried their best to curtail the mockery, but nothing really helped until the name change and a little bit of time had passed. Things at the daycare are now back to normal, the other kids are calling her Carrie, and everyone has, fortunately, moved on. Edit 3. Please don't harass Redditors who gave a YTA judgment on my first post. They gave their honest judgment at the time in an online space specifically set up for the purpose. I didn't post on an advice sub, I posted on a judgment sub, And there's no reason to call people to the mat for judgments I asked for, made in good faith, from 3 years ago. A comment defending Stephanie in response to someone commenting that she's a bad friend to OP. Stephanie is genuinely a great friend and a good person. She once dropped everything and drove 300 miles because I had just been in a, relatively minor, car accident in a city I lived all alone in as a young adult. She once gifted me $1,500, no questions asked, and insisted I never even think about paying it back, when I needed to get out of a really bad cohabiting situation while broke. When we were teenagers and the cool boy she had a massive crush on made fun of me for something I was extremely sensitive about. Instead of keeping quiet, she blew her top, stuck up for me and told him off, then led me away to comfort me away from him. She is loyal and kind and has incredible character. This post is such a tiny snapshot of who she is as a person. When I raised my concerns, Stephanie was emotional, very pregnant and somewhat sleep deprived. Her pregnancy was rough on her body, and on top of hormones, I think she was just genuinely confused by what I was trying to tell her. Final update. For those of you who have contacted me asking for an update, I wanted to circle back and close the book on the baby Carrie chapter. As of last month, Carrie is now legally Caroline, last name, and she has even been issued a new birth certificate with her new legal name. The daycare bullying issues had already died down since Stephanie and her husband switched to calling her Carrie. But this legal name change now means that the Karen issue won't crop up again when she starts school. There were also some other minor incidents that pushed Stephanie and her husband to make that decision around a legal name change. They were getting to the point where, almost any time they were having to provide Karen's legal name to get a service, they were getting an immediate reaction, even from adults. It was usually just a meaningful look, but barbed comments were not unusual. The final straw was when they were at the airport getting ready to fly to visit Stephanie's in-laws with Carrie. The TSA agent at security made a snarky comment, and then later when they needed to ask the gate agent about their seats, the gate agent rudely laughed at seeing Carrie's ticket, then showed the gate agent standing next to her, who just shook her head and said, "Poor kid," to her co-worker while fully ignoring Stephanie and her husband. And they had this interaction in front of Carrie. Something about that day in the airport was a turning point for Stephanie and her husband, and they started the name change process as soon as they got home. It was much easier than they were expecting, and cost a grand total of $30. Carrie is a joyful, sociable little girl, and while it's impossible to know right now if these negative experiences caused any lasting damage, and I sincerely hope they did not, I'm happy to see that she continues to be a very outgoing, confident child. The conversation with Stephanie I mentioned in my October update was awkward and brief, but we've actually gotten back into it a few times since. Stephanie has apologized profusely for her initial reaction when we first talked. I've apologized for approaching things so poorly, and not telling her right away about what our friends were saying behind her back, and in those conversations, we mainly ended up focusing on the resulting spiraling of my mom and aunt and what a mess that turned into. Together we've started to unpack some of the intergenerational shit around our family issues. To provide some of that context, our maternal grandparents were a nightmare. Our grandfather was an authoritarian revivalist preacher who was physically abusive and referred to himself as the spiritual leader and ultimate authority of the family. Our grandmother was a manipulative narcissist, who psychologically tormented my mom and aunt for their entire childhoods. As a result, my mom and aunt's trauma bonded considerably during their childhood and grew into extremely anxious and reactive adults. Any whiff of conflict sends them into panic mode, and in our family, we have these well-worn grooves of behavioral habits with my mom and aunt overreacting to anything that feels like discord, and scrambling to clumsily smooth things over. As a result, Stephanie and I have both been working hard to build better boundaries with our mom's generation, and have agreed to be really cautious about what information we give them, especially anything that is highly emotional. I've been in therapy for a couple of years now, and Stephanie also started therapy late last year. We've been talking about the ways that my grandparents traumatizing our moms caused intergenerational issues that impacted us, and Stephanie is determined that the cycle ends with her, and that these issues will not go on to touch Carrie. Thank you everyone for your kind words, both here on my profile posts and on the Best of Updates reposts, which I've also been reading. I've gotten some incredibly thoughtful and kind messages, which have meant a lot to me, even if I haven't had the chance to respond to all of them. For those who may still want to be critical of Stephanie, I again want to emphasize how out of character her initial reaction was, and how much physical, hormonal, and emotional upheaval she was in at the time. These posts are a teeny tiny window into just one aspect of the dynamic, funny, kind, caring full human being that is my cousin and best friend. Stephanie has been my most loyal and trusted friend for pretty much my entire life, and she has fully earned some grace for reacting less than perfectly to my extremely clumsy approach when she was sleep deprived, hormonally wrecked and brain fogged. Stephanie has read these posts now as well, along with most of your comments, and, after I explained to her what Reddit is, they were helpful to both of us in our talks about our weird family dynamic. I can't imagine I'll have any more updates down the line, but thanks for following along the last few years. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.